Hello, everyone. Welcome. On behalf of the New York Encounter, thank you for being here. We welcome both those who are with us in the pavilion and those who are joining us online. I'm Amy Hickl. I'm a teacher and administrator at a school in Los Angeles, California, and I'm moderating this event today. And before starting, I'd like to thank the Benedictine College in Atchison, Kansas, for helping us to organize this great event. So one of the claims of our theme this year for the Encounter is that these signs that we see in us and around us, this uneasiness, this loneliness, this sadness, they reveal something that is irreducible in the human being, the desire for beauty, for justice, for home, for truth, and so on. So according to Father Giussani, to understand this and to begin to address this is first and foremost a problem of education. He believed that in order to regain the gusto for life, what he called the taste for living, we need to enter into reality and discover there what makes that possible. And he insists that for this, we need to be educated. This is the heart of what education is. I'm a teacher, I'm an administrator. I was not taught this in teacher school. Instead, for us, it's skills and knowledge that the students need to acquire. So coming across the work of Father Giussani and the way he talks about education is deeply fascinating for me. And we have with us two friends who are very familiar with this pedagogy who are going to help us unpack and go into this more. So we have Hans Broekman. He's the principal of Liverpool College, a school for children from ages 4 to 19 in the heart of Liverpool. Hans is a native of the Netherlands. He attended high school in the US and then gained his master's degree with honors in classics from the University of St. Andrews in Scotland. Following teaching positions in the UK, Hans returned to the US where he served as deputy headmaster, and principal in Washington, D.C., Arkansas, and Tennessee. He was appointed the 17th principal of Liverpool College in July 2007 and took up the appointment in June 2008. From serving primarily wealthy citizens of Liverpool, the school now reflects in its students' body every ethnic background, every advantage and disadvantage, every faith tradition, every country of origin found in inner city Liverpool, and Hans was instrumental in making this happen. The school was awarded an outstanding rating in all areas by the National School Inspectorate in November of 2019. So we welcome Hans. And we also have with us Aaron Riches. He is an associate professor of theology at Benedictine College. He was born in Canada and completed his doctoral studies in England at the University of Nottingham. After almost a decade teaching at the major seminary of the Archdiocese of Granada in Spain, he took up his current position at Benedictine in Atchison, Kansas, where he lives with his wife and 6 children. So welcome, Aaron. Thank you both for being here. So I want to start by asking both of you how you came across Father Giussani. And like Hans, I know you have a particular interesting story. Can you share it with us?
Yeah, I think during COVID, when the school closed and I wasn't working 60 hours a week looking after the school, I remembered that on 9/11, on the day of 9/11, our family were traveling back from Europe to the United States, and we were diverted to Canada, to Moncton, and were eventually rescued from an ice hockey rink with our young children by a Canadian family. And in the basement of their house, we just watched CNN, as I think most people were just watching cable news all the time. And this priest was invited to speak, a rather corpulent priest. And I think you know who I'm talking about when I say that. And he was amazing. It was very brief. He was very honest. because he said, I know that these acts come from religion because I recognize this passion in myself. So when COVID struck, I was bicycling along the Mersey River, and I thought, I wonder what that guy would say about COVID. So I was going to Google corpulent priest speaks. But it was CNN 9/11 priest. Anyway, I discovered that he had passed away. And one of the wonders of the internet is you're then directed to other videos of him. And there was one that had only been viewed 453 times at the time, where a person from a TV network called The Meaning of Life TV interviewed him for an hour. And it was very obvious it was a hot summer day. He was in short sleeves. They were both sweating profusely. And I was completely riveted by everything that he said. Everything. And at the very end of this interview, he said, there's the man I follow. So, okay, who could that be? So I ordered his books. Amazon was still working throughout the pandemic, and then discovered a link with Giussani, The Risk of Education. And I had definitely found something there. Then I did not realize there was a movement. I just realized there were these books. And you're all here, so you know how to do this, but trying to get in touch with CL is impossible. So, I spent eventually, I think I wrote an email in frustration to headquarters in Milan, because people were saying, well, this guy will call you, and we're sort of there, and then I discovered actually that my wife was receiving WhatsApp messages from the CL website, from a lady in an adjacent parish in Liverpool. And this is all in the middle of COVID. And I began to follow that group, who've become very close friends of ours. But this is, 3 years ago, something like that.
Yeah, thank you. And Aaron, how did you first come across Father Giussani?
Well, I went to the University of Virginia, where I was going to do a PhD, and I left only 2 years after, because I followed my professor, John Milbank, to England. And John Milbank had, in the time after he left the University of Virginia, I'd met these friends in the Cellini and Milan, and there was different people that were kind of coming up to the University of Nottingham, and they were taking him to the Rimini meeting. And so we got to have some friends in the movement. But it wasn't until, I think 2008 or 9 that one of those friends at the Catholic University in Milan sent a 19-year-old kid up to the University of Nottingham to finish his undergraduate thesis with John Milbank, that I met the movement. And it's because this kid came up, and the friend in Milan called and said, will you look after him, make sure he doesn't, get lost in Nottingham. And he showed up, and his name was Michelangelo. He smoked Toscanos, he drank beer, he wore a Rancid t-shirt, he loved playing stupid folk songs on the guitar. He walked into our house and just started doing the dishes without being asked. He became really good friends with our 1.5-year-old son. And he said to us, and because I'm from this thing, CL, which I'd heard of, and I'd even, at this point, owned The Risk of Education, but unfortunately I tried to read it and didn't understand a word. He said, and there's this other thing that I do because I'm part of the movement, which is School of Community, and there's no School of Community in Nottingham. So I'm going to have a School of Community in your living room, and you and Melissa are invited to come. And so we had our first encounter with the movement in our living room through this 19-year-old kid. But here's the remarkable thing, is that at that time I had just gotten my PhD in theology, and I was starting to adjunct teach at the University of Nottingham. And all of a sudden there's this 19-year-old undergraduate, and his gusto for life, his ability to live all the factors of life fully was something I had never met before. And not only that, I converted to Christianity when I was 27 years old, and there was a bit of a before and after, maybe not theoretically, but the way that I lived, I felt a kind of a fracture in my life. There were a lot of parts of my life that I sort of wanted to push aside or push under. And he came, and he was super into anarchism, he was super into Trotskyism, he was super into punk rock, he was super into playing the guitar, he was super into, praying morning prayer. And the experience of being around him, and this is the really serious thing, this is education, right? Here's the authority, this kid who's 19 years old. I'm a 30-some-odd-year-old at this point, PhD in theology, and he gave me back to myself. Right? He made my life whole just being around him. So we did the School of Community. We went to an encounter with Caron there in 2008 or 9, and then eventually he goes back to Italy, and he becomes a monk at the Cascinazza monastery, where he still is today.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. Yeah, so education, we want, yes, to learn like math and how to write essays and all of that, but we also want that taste for living. And Hans, you have shared before that when you did read The Risk of Education in that time period, you had, by all accounts, a highly successful school. All of the accolades, you were, this was the ideal as an educator. And yet, after reading The Risk of Education, you said, we have to change some things around here. So can you talk to us a little bit? Yeah. What was missing? What did Father Giussani have?
Well, he had life, didn't he? He had a vision of education that far, far exceeds the regulatory framework of British state education. It's not difficult to exceed that. But this is exceed in an exponential fashion. I think my experience of reading that book was, this is true. This is true. I then, as our friends from Ireland would say when you ask for direction, don't start from here. Because, I looked at the school that I was leading. It is a secular school. It takes children from every background, every faith tradition. The most active faith tradition in my school by far are the Muslim pupils that I have, who dialogue with me about that all the time. So, but I could see straight away that what Giussani was saying was something that's true is true everywhere. It was true for my school. The practical question of what that would mean for the school. Two very simple things. One thing I realized was that in our school it was not possible for people to form relationships. That an English kid has about 15 different teachers. They might see that teacher 2-3 times a fortnight. So we made a change which enabled a group of young people to be with one teacher over a period of years for 3.5-4 hours a week, doing things like playing the ukulele, which your friend from Milan, I think, would have approved of. So we almost invented a series of what we called, learning opportunities. When the bureaucrats get hold of this in inspections, they say, you have an excellent personal development program. And we found something that we could expand and that could inspire people to think much more broadly about that. The other thing was the pedagogy, the actual teaching. So the British government is obsessed with the quality of questioning that takes place in a classroom. And I definitely saw an opening there. I think the question, what does this mean? is a question that is seldom asked in school. It's such an easy thing to introduce. When we teach something, what does this mean? Starting from the experience of the pupil, this was also a dramatic pedagogical change. So, you know, the vision that the government has of an English teacher is a kind of petroleum transfer engineer, but then knowledge. Our regulator defines knowledge as a permanent change in the brain. Okay, so you have a very reductive and reduced idea of that. So just by asking the question of a child, what does this mean? What do you want? Why do you want that? Is this true in your experience? This is a question that's never been asked in an English school. You'd be amazed at the effect that that has. So just these two very simple things in a situation that is constrained. You know, we're not able to do perhaps all the things that we want to do. This is a system. But just emphasizing those two things. I think we made those changes in the curriculum, in the way we question pupils, always try to relate what you're learning to totality through the question, what does this mean? I think those were the changes that we made.
Yeah, Aaron, do you find that as well? This question of like, what does this mean? How does it relate to my life? Do you find that need in your students?
Yeah, I mean, I think that how does this relate to me in my life? I mean, in the first place, I can say that it came up for me myself as an educator, and the first classes that I taught was before I knew anything about the movement. I mean, I had this Risk of Education book, which I didn't understand. But, you know, I taught classes in Christology and stuff like that at the University of Nottingham. But when I went to Spain, I had this problem, which is that I didn't really know Spanish, and I was put in front of seminarians, and I had to teach them. And that was incredibly awkward. And I know, well, there's like a coincidence, right, is that it turned out that, you know, I had more practice speaking Spanish at School of Community in Spain than I did speaking Spanish anywhere else. So, but the other thing too is that if you don't know a language very well, you have to ground everything really deeply in experience in order to say anything that might be of any importance to anyone. If you're talking in your own language, it's easy to just kind of let the words kind of fly and thoughts, and just you sort of leave the ground completely. And so I discovered that in order to propose anything to my students, I really had to start with my own life, my own circumstance, something that happened to me today, an event. I saw this on the way to work today. And these students, the seminarians, they really responded. Now, it's not that the movement wasn't at all in the seminary. In fact, the movement was in the seminary because I had been invited to teach there by the Archbishop of Granada, Javier Martinez, who's has a deep history in the movement. But I think that there was a newness in the way that I taught, only because I taught from a place of complete fragility, where the only thing I had to hold on to was my own experience. And then I have, you know, I've followed that into my own teaching. I think at the college, Benedictine College now, I try to start there. I don't always. I mean, I'm as susceptible to abstractions and you know, as anyone else. But that's where I try to start. For me.
Yeah, so I want to touch on this idea of authority, because you've both talked about it in various ways. So if my role as an educator, as a parent, as an adult, is not just to like transmit knowledge, and yet we need an authority, a word which is highly charged these days. Help us understand Father Giussani's conception, his idea of what an authority is, why it's important. How is one an authority for their students, their children?
Après toi.
Okay. Well, I mean, the first way to answer the question is that what he says, authority comes from the Latin, which has to do with, what lets something grow. And so to really have an authority involves at once making a real concrete proposal that's been made flesh and blood in me to another. And then in a certain sense, I mean, you accompany, but at the same time you also step back to let it take root in the other. And the experience I have is that, I have a certainty that I bring to the classroom that's been verified, and when I propose it, the more I propose it with life, with flesh and blood, with fullness, with examples from my own life, with fragilities and mistakes that I've made, the more it really is something the student can approach. And the more that they can approach it, the more that they start to verify it themselves. And this is, for me, the miracle, is that it grows into a certainty in them, and then I can follow them. And then I can become the pupil, and they're the educator. And that's the sort of the circularity for me of what authority is. Authority is not a thing I can hold on to. Authority is a thing I have to try to generate in another, or give the tools to generate in another, so that I can step back and then let them be the authority for me.
You put a little more flesh on this for us. Like, for example, you were telling me earlier that you had invited your students to read the biography of Father Giussani in class. It's like this thick.
Right.
Tell us about that experience.
Okay, so it was kind of a stupid idea because the book is too big to read in an undergraduate high school or undergraduate college class. But I did it because I wanted to read the biography. But I also did it. I mean, what you do for yourself, you do for others. I mean, if you really do it from a good motive. But the other thing was too is that I had this idea that, like, if you pick up The Risk of Education, you read it, it's hard. But if you start with the life of this man, it's not that it's easy, but it makes sense, right? The journey that he made is the thing that makes this book important. And so I want to look at the things that he looked at. I want to hear the sounds that he heard. I want to hear the thing which gave him life and generated this whole thing, which is the life of the movement. And so I proposed this class, and the students, I think the students actually really enjoyed it. And the most incredible thing for me is that at the end of the class, I said, okay, this is what we're going to do for the final examination. They're all worried about, like, when's the final exam, Dr. Riches? Are you going to give us the question in advance? No, the final exam is this. In the movement, we do a thing called the assembly, and that's what the final exam is, right? And so there was an assembly, and they each had to speak. I'll read you one response here of a student. Which, to me, this is beautiful. So I said, what's the thing you take away from this class? What's the thing, if you're going to give a synthesis of the thing that was most important for you, what would you say? And this student says, towards the end of his life, when he was really sick, there was a day where he was in great pain, and he said, in my condition, I have very little life left, but until my last breath, my first feeling is gratitude, because it comes from him. Oh gosh, and she laughs. I didn't think the thing that would strike me from this book would be gratitude, and she points at how big the book is, I've never had this understanding of gratitude before, but reading about Giussani and seeing how he sees other people with gratitude, how he sees people as a gift, was the thing that struck me the most, because you can see it from the very beginning of the book. The way he talks about his father, who's a socialist, and he sees his imperfections, but what he remembers and what he sees is the gift that was given through him, to him through his father. He does this over and over, whether it's this hard situation or a beautiful, beautiful situation. He has this certainty that what's being given to him is really a gift. I mean, Giussani, saw this gift in the nurses around him, and in his friends and in people he barely knew. He would come to them as if they were a gift only given for him. It doesn't mean he wasn't aware of their imperfections, but what he saw was the good things, not just the good things, but the good things as gift, which is to say he saw the destiny shining through them. So the thing I want to take away, what I will take away from this class, is that I too want now to see everything as gift. I've never been so thankful. And that doesn't mean that things aren't hard, but the more I lose, the more thankful I am. So if I ever forget, remind me that this was my experience. Now, this is a kid. This is a kid whose experience of the movement, even though they went to Benedictine College, they weren't in the clue, they weren't in the charism. They just happened to be in a capstone class in theology with me, and that's the verification happen, right? I want to follow that person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Hans?
Well, I just wish I'd met him and his example a lot earlier. I think when you have a vocation to be an educator and you become aware of somebody like Father Giussani, it's a standard. It's a judgment. I had the privilege of staying in Milan. CL said, she lives on the 5th floor, ring the bell, see, someone will open the door, you will stay there. And she turned out to be a person who was in his first class, 1954. So as an educator, and also as a principal, I've been a principal for 26 years, and a father for about the same amount of time. And Giussani's understanding of authority is something that I wish I'd had, very aware that I wish I'd had that earlier in my life. Where does his, we experience the authority of others as a shield, as something under which we can grow, under which we're safe, and something that helps us grow. And of course, ultimately, that's rooted in his witness to the presence, the presence in him. And really, in my setting, in a secular setting, this is something that everybody I work with acknowledges is true. Why is this teacher so effective? Why is this person having the impact on young people, which is as educators what we want to have? Why is this person the place where this growth is happening? Well, because they're witnesses to something beyond themselves. They are not trying to do this on their own. Yeah.
Yeah, Aaron, we were talking about witness earlier too, and the role of, Father Giussani says at a certain point, it's very interesting, that all of education is a witness. You're witnessing to something.
Yeah, there's a lot to say. I was thinking, and I think that this is, what does the witness to? The witness witnesses to Christ, who is the teacher, but he's more than just the teacher, because he's also the principal point at which, if I look at him, everything takes on a meaning. One of my favorite quotes in this book is actually the quotation that Giussani makes of Romano Guardini, when he says, "In the experience of a great love, everything becomes a factor in its orbit." And if I can have that experience of a great love of Christ, who is the real teacher, who is the point at which life is truly given, then even the disaffections, the frustrations, can be understood within that point of irreducible positivity. So the educator, and I think, to bear witness, the educator has to bear witness that life is good, that the world that we live in is good, that the moment of history that I'm in now, even though it might be overwhelming in certain moments, it's good, and it's good that I'm here. And he says, fix your eyes on that one point of positivity, the crack where the Leonard Cohen, the crack where the light shines through. That's the point at which you see the truth, and all the other factors take on a consistency. And so that, I mean, I think that there's a quote here in this. I'm not sure that this is perfect for witness, but it's one that is really important to me. He says, you know, quoting from the Gospel of John, he loved his own in the world, and he loved them to the end. And this is really what tradition is, right? You know, we can think about tradition as being all kinds of ideas, but really the real tradition is that Jesus gives himself, right? He gives himself. And the night in which he's betrayed, he hands on his presence. That's the core of the Christian tradition. And the journey, he says now, the journey that the educator and pupil are called to take together is the journey of explicitly running the risk of accepting the call and the challenge of this definition of ourselves. Right? This definition of myself as one who's loved so much that God enters into the world and dies for me. That he takes on all the negativity of my life, the frustrations, and meets me there, right? Whither shall I flee from thy spirit? And then he says that this is how the mystery invites us to recognize ourselves as made by him. That I'm made from this mercy that will chase me to the bottom of hell if he has to. This is what I want to bear witness to, right? And it is in this common journey, the common journey of the educator and the pupil who keep on switching spots, right? Defined by the definitive end point of the destiny, who came into the world to find me, even in the bottom of hell or in my worst failure. It's at this point that we come to know the features of our path. And that's the gospel, right? That's to announce the gospel. It's to bear witness to this thing. It happened, that he really did this, that God took on my negativity and found me there.
Thank you. So you were also touching on this point of, so the educator is one who bears witness that life is good, that, as you were saying, like there's something that takes on the frustrations, the negative experiences, and can sustain the young person through those. Father Giussani says it's absolutely critical, this role of verification and criticism, that if things are going to if I'm going to become an adult, that I have to take the ideas that have been given to me and my tradition, sift through them, and take them up as my own. And he speaks in a very particular way about criticism, not as something cynical or negative, but as something essential and important. So can you help us unpack that a little bit more?
Well, I mean, first, I mean, criticism, I mean, what Giussani doesn't mean is what Karl Marx says when he says, you know, ruthless criticism of all things existing as a kind of negative thing to find out the hidden agenda. That's a kind of form, I think, for Giussani of skepticism. This criticism is opening up the image that he has of the backpack, that, you know, the parent or educator puts stuff in the child's backpack, and at a certain point, the child starts taking the things out of the backpack to see how they work. And this is the most beautiful point, because it's a point where the educator really has to step back and not in any way micromanage what the young person is doing, which is finding the things that are useful for them. Because it matters not at all if I believe that Christ was raised on the third day in the abstract. What matters is that I see where it touches my life in flesh and blood now. So the witness, the educator, has to, when he or she proposes, has to give examples from their own life. It's no use to give examples from other people's lives, really. It's your own life. Where is it flesh and blood for you? And then the student or the pupil or takes these tools out of their backpack and looks to see how they work, if they work. And he says, you know, there's the freedom of saying yes or no, but I almost want to say, and I think that Giussani would agree with this, it's not even a matter of saying yes or no, it's the quality of the yes or no that you say. Because there's a certain kind of even no, when it's finding it's not working, that's still sincere. The question is if the student is sincere when they're trying to figure out whether this tradition works in life, whether it's useful, that you can still have something to work with if the no is said from sincerity. But of course in the yes too, I mean, to say yes in a placid way wouldn't be helpful. But to say yes with a full-blooded searching, that's what we want to get at, and that involves letting the other be free.
Hans, what would you say?
Well, the first insight I would have is that I think that the concept of tradition is too focused on the past, actually.
Yeah.
I think, inevitably, in educational and ecclesial terms, when you use that word, you're inviting people to take a position in relation to a cultural canon or a religious canon. Of course, the tradition is also about the future. I think I read something from Pope Benedict, talking about that. The tradition also has some. So my experience with pupils is that if I start going on about the tradition or my tradition, and of course in my school people would say, well, this is my tradition. Whose tradition? Whose virtue? Whose value? But if we think of the criticism as the fundamental judgment that is at the heart of all education from our experience, again, I think we're in danger of mystifying this a little bit. I mean, any educator in this room is going to recognize immediately what we're talking about, because ultimately we learn in judgment against a standard through experience, and for us, that judgment is made against the totality that is Christ, the complete, the moment of judgment is Him, and to guide people to understand the ingredient of judgment in their own education is to move away from the conceptions that Aaron mentioned, in terms of criticism as destruction or negation, but rather it's always a yes. Ultimately, our judgment is always a yes, even when the judgment is no. And I think when an educator is able to present life, the fullness of life, the totality of life, the judgment then becomes about the future. It in a sense doesn't. It becomes about the path that I do want to take. It steps away from an excessive focus on what Giussani warned against, traditionalism.
Yeah.
So I think understanding that present, the education is about now. It's about pupils and teachers now making that judgment.
Yeah, can I just?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that this emphasis on the present is absolutely key, and especially, I mean, just to go back to the point I made before, which is that at the core of the tradition is the gift of presence itself, that Jesus' own presence. The other thing I wanted to say is this other point is that we say Giussani bets on the human heart. I mean, the criteria for judgment is in you, and no one else can do that work. That's a great thing to say. There's a little story of Giussani. Some kid in Milan becomes a communist, and his parents freak out, and they don't know what to do. And the dad calls up Father Giussani and says, what are we going to do? Then little kids join the Communist Party, and he says, just have me over for dinner. I can sort it all out. And this is enough to reassure the mother to I mean she's palpitating, And so the Giussani comes over and he brings a big box, and the kid comes out and he says, little Guido or whatever, congratulations, you've made a great move in your life. You've taken a decision that concerns your destiny. It concerns life itself. It concerns your pursuit of truth. And I brought you this present to celebrate. And the kid opens up the box in front of his parents, and aghast, it's Leon Trotsky, Rosa Luxemburg, Karl Marx. It's all the different traditions of Marxism. And Giussani says, we're going to read these books together, and if we find the thing in here that you're looking for, then we're going to make the best damn communist out of you that we can. But if the thing you're really looking for isn't in here, then we'll start again with the proposal of Christianity. And that's amazing because he really bets on the kid's heart to find it. Like, you'll find what you need, and I'm not going to micromanage it for you, right? And that certainty that Giussani has, that all roads lead to Christ, is obviously overwhelming. That's what the parent who's trying to sort of micromanage what the kid gets involved in betrays, a kind of fearfulness that is not certainty. But when Giussani walks in like that, that's absolute certainty, but it's also accompaniment and love and certainty, like betting on the heart of that child. They'll find what they're looking for.
Yeah, and that's like actually what I wanted to ask you both. These are beautiful things, but do you have examples or stories from today that can help us see what this verification looks like with this authority and accompaniment of the student, the child, all the way to the certainty? What does it look like in your classrooms, as fathers?
It's a dangerous question, and on this one, I'm definitely going to let Hans.
Yeah, well played, Aaron. I think when you're a father, you think about this, I think, more deeply and more intensely than any other way. I think the fundamental what I notice in the pupils and when you meet me at my school, you're 2 steps away from being expelled. This is a large organization. There's lots and lots of pastoral and academic interventions. When you and your family are in my office, things really are not okay. There could be a policeman in there, a social worker. And what I have noticed is that the fundamental question that presents itself in those situations is there any mercy in the world? Is there any tenderness? Is there a possibility of forgiveness? Does this even exist? So, I deal with people who are dealing with me in a role. And I think the challenge for the father is to think more like the educator, and for the educator to think more like the father. To try to be that authority which protects, which nourishes, and which witnesses to the reality that there is tenderness in the world. Now, if my students heard me say this, they would say, "What a load of baloney that is," because that guy is super strict. He punishes. There is, but I do have this amazing sense in my context that people are not sure that there is tenderness in the world. And so in the hierarchy, we could talk about it psychologically or educationally, in the hierarchy of what we need to do as fathers and as educators is to make sure that people know there is tenderness in the world, that we have experienced mercy, that there is forgiveness of all sins, and that these, as Aaron has said, the despair that marks a lot of people's experience in my school is fundamentally a deep concern whether or not there's anything good in the world. It's much more severe than people realize, because fundamentally the fear, their reaction to things that happen in reality reveal to a fatherly heart that they have not experienced tenderness or mercy.
Yeah, wow, that was really helpful to me. Thank you, Hans, because this formula that the educator needs to be more like a father and the father more like an educator rings so profoundly true to me. It's not something I ever quite thought of, but I see that. Every once in a while, you know, I'll have a student that'll say, oh, you've really been like a father to me. And I think, gosh, I've only messed up my own kids. And the reason that, that a father tends to mess up his own kids is obviously faithlessness, lack of certainty of Christ, you know, and so then they parent, which is educate, from a position of fear. And a friend of mine said to me one time, you know, you can only parent in a human way when you parent from love, never from fear. And those are terrifying words for a parent, because most parents do parent from fear a lot. But I'll just say this is one very, very small example of a kind of mystery that happened, which is that, you know, I came to a point in my life not too long ago where I thought with my two eldest kids, I really wanted to say sorry to them for some things I had done as a parent. And I sat them down separately. I mean, didn't sit them down. It was in moments where I found there's a quiet moment. And I said, there's a couple of things I just wanted to say sorry for. And some of them are like, you know, from way back when you were like a kid. And I mean, one of the examples is, I remember I gave like it was a stupid sort of ultimatum. If you do this again, then I'm going to throw your hot chocolate in the garbage. And I was pissed off. I was kind of mad. I was overbearing. And of course, this little kid, little enough to be little, but old enough to remember even now, did it again, and I threw it in the garbage, and they cried so much that we had to walk out of the restaurant that we were in. And I often had thought back on that, I thought, like, what kind of a dad does that? Like, that was a mistake, right? And I harmed my own kid in doing that. And that's just one example. And so, I mean, the joy of this mercy is really that, I mean, forgiveness is like, it's another gift, right? It's a remarkable gift. And this is Christianity, that everything flows from mercy and over-determines, because in a way, an error, just like our sin, just like for our sin, it's God's opportunity. It's almost like He's glad we sinned, because now He gets to prove to us just how much He loves us. And when I sin against my own kid, I have to take it that way. This is an opportunity to prove just how much I really love them, which is to go and humble myself and say, you know, there's this thing that happened, and I'm sorry.
Yeah, Father Giussani says something interesting about that, though. He says that it's not like often we as the adults get paralyzed or stuck in this like desire to be perfect. But Father Giussani says it's not really a matter of like moral coherence, that I always do exactly what I say, but that what is absolutely essential, he says it's a scandal, a wound in the child, is if I lack a coherence to the ideal. In other words, like I'm trying to instill these values, I say these things are important, but what I live out in life is different.
Right. Well, I mean, his commentary on the Miserere from the Spirito Gentile, at the end he says, the ideal the ideal is not to sin. The ideal is Jesus Christ. And if the ideal was not to sin, then it would be like desiring to arrive in front of Him and say, look, I did it on my own. And so that means that sin is not an incoherence in and of itself. What Pope Francis says, sin is the privileged moment of our encounter with Christ. When we recognize it as sin and we name it for what it was, it becomes a positive moment.
Yeah, I think, you know, what I see in my colleagues is that coherence comes from fidelity to a vocation.
Fidelity to the vocation of teaching?
Absolutely. The coherence that the pupil experiences comes from the fidelity to the vocation. So every teacher is aware that they're not the teacher they want to be. You know, I teach. I think they try and no one wants to teach all the first year's RS, so they give them to me. Sometimes in groups of 100. This is a sort of timetabling issue. And I think what I notice is that when I'm not faithful to that vocation that day, they know it. Yeah. They have infallible antennae. Yeah. They are not. It reminds me of a line from the novel Death Comes to the Archbishop, if you remember that. He says, I do not see you as you really are. I see you through my love of you. That's who you are. So the challenge for the educator is the challenge of affectivity, really, because fundamentally the vocation is a vocation to love in all circumstances. And the possibility of the education occurs, as Aaron has said, in a kind of mutual authority that is grounded in that love. So fidelity to the vocation, this is always a great conversation to have with my union rep. You know, because they're forever going on strike. And you say, well, we've got to be faithful to our vocation. You know, the children have to learn. We can't be on strike all the time. And they look at you like, well, what are you talking about? But no, that's, I think when you really listen to what teachers, when you really listen to what students and pupils are saying about their teachers, the coherence they're looking for is fidelity to the vocation.
Yeah.
I could keep asking these gentlemen questions all day, but we're coming to the end of our time. I do think that's a good place to leave it, because this mercy and this fidelity are what allow me to be free as an educator, and that allows my students to be free as young learners. So thank you both very much. So one last announcement. You can get, your gift makes the encounter free for everyone. So please give generously at our donation table outside this auditorium, or in a couple of clicks at newyorkencounter.org/donate. Your donation is tax deductible. And thank you again for Benedictine College for co-sponsoring this event.